Watkins, and I am here today with Adam Ellwanger. Professor Ellwanger is a professor of English and director of the graduate program in rhetoric and composition at the University of Houston, downtown. Professor Ellwanger authored recently an open letter that both decries the danger of ideological conformity in academia and also outlines commitments to take specific forms of action. The letter has been widely circulating for the past few months and has gained the signatures of over 160 academics worldwide and counting. Adam, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so to get started, what motivated you to write the letter in the first place? Give us a little bit of a backstory.
I guess it probably actually began the path to the letter a few years ago when I was the subject of a Title IX complaint at my university. And if your viewers are curious, they can read about that at the James G. Martin Center. In the wake of that, I joined organizations like Heterodox Academy and some other entities that I thought were doing work towards improving this situation. But I was kind of dissatisfied with what I guess I would call the gospel of viewpoint diversity. And I think that there's a lot of people who think, well, if we could only convince people in the university that it's good to have differences of opinion, well, then they would agree with us and these things that we're seeing happening on campus would change. I think that's great, but the problem with it is I think most academics already know that viewpoint diversity is desirable and good when we're seeking truth. If we're trying to find out what's true, then it's great to have different perspectives so we can have a dialogue and bring ourselves closer to the truth. But I don't think that's what's happening on campus anymore. I don't think as many people are interested in seeking truth as much as they are imparting doctrine. And when it comes to imparting doctrine, well, actually differing viewpoints is a hindrance. It makes it harder to indoctrinate, for lack of a better term. And then this summer, I think in the wake of the events of May and June with the killing of George Floyd and some other things, I was observing university discourse at my university and other universities. And I was surprised at the degree to which there was an explicit, enthusiastic endorsement of views that I would only call, for lack of a better term, Marxist, postmodern, and sort of anti-foundational ideas about truth. And so at that point, it became clear to me that this was getting worse and not getting better. And I decided I need to write out for myself what I am and am not willing to do when it comes to the expectations my university has of me. And the purpose of that was so that when I am presented with a new situation, I can kind of do a gut check on myself and say, well, look, I wrote down back in May that this was a bridge too far for me. And my hope was that that would help me in that moment say no to the things that I felt like I couldn't do. Mm-hmm. And I would point to Rod Dreher, who is a blogger at the American Conservative. And I responded by email to one of his stories this summer and sent this letter to him. And he kind of encouraged me to send it to other people. Initially, it was just for me. But then I got the idea, geez, maybe I could get some other people to sign on to this. And this has been a very long answer to your question. But once it started to circulate, it really started to gain traction. And, you know, I would also credit Jeffrey Miller at the University of New Mexico for being instrumental in some of those early stages. We have about, I think it's about 175 now signatories, and we're still accepting more. So if any viewers are interested, I'd be happy to take an email or whatever.
You're specifically looking for signatures from academics?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and I would go on to say that I received an enormous response from people who are living or working in university contexts, but who are graduate students or lecturers or adjunct faculty or tenure track faculty who wanted to express solidarity and support for this, but said that they felt that their livelihood was too much at risk without the protection of tenure. And and of course, I think they're very well justified in those concerns. But the people who actually put their name to the letter are really only a fraction of the people that we heard from, and who said, yes, I'm happy this is happening. I wish I could put my name to it.
Good. No, that's great to know, especially for the viewers who are watching this. So now I want to kind of shift a little bit and talk more about, well, the philosophical ideals of higher education. So many agree, as you've just said, that higher ed seems to be leaning very much to the left in terms of curriculum, governance, campus culture, you name it. However, I thought it was interesting that in the beginning of the letter, you state that although a balance of political affiliation is desirable, it's not in itself absolutely necessary. Could you explain why that's the case and what is necessary for a healthy academic culture?
Well, I think that, if we want to break it down basically into sort of left and right perspectives, I don't think that we need a university that is 50% right perspectives and 50% left perspectives, in part because it's just not true that the people who are qualified to work in universities will break down along those lines of 50-50, right? We shouldn't expect that there would be perfect parity between those two sides. Instead, what we need is, and this is the part that somewhat puzzles me, is universities are really the great advocate of diversity and minority opinions and minority perspectives. And yet when it comes to this one orientation, right, when it comes to the political realm or perhaps the moral realm, all of the sudden that love and reverence for sort of diversity and minority perspectives goes out the window, and all of a sudden we get to where we are now, where there's certain viewpoints that are unspeakable, right? And if views are unspeakable, well, then we can't seek truth anymore, because we need a dialogue in order to have it. As long as the people who occupy the majority of the university, which currently is people on the left, and probably would be, even if we didn't have the barriers for sort of intellectuals who are on the right to enter the academy, it probably still would be left oriented. But as long as those people are committed to a dialogue and committed to protecting the expression of heterodox viewpoints, then the university can still do its work. We can still discover knowledge. We can still press on the soft spots of each other's ideas and push each other towards discovery and innovation. But when we get into a context of kind of groupthink, where people apparently are risking their very careers or professional lives in order to speak uncomfortable truths or heretical perspectives, then it becomes a real problem for the production of knowledge, and the university just can't do what it's meant to do anymore in terms of its service to our culture and our society and our nation.
So in what ways would you say universities are stifling free inquiry or fostering groupthink? And has it gotten worse in recent years?
It's definitely gotten worse in recent years. I was a freshman. I came to a college campus when I was 18 years old in 1996. I had more hair then. But I've lived and worked on a college campus ever since that time. Ever since I was 18, I've never worked or lived outside of a university context. And while there was sort of a favoring of left perspectives in the university in the late 90s and the early 2000s, I think I saw the tide start to turn around the invasion of Iraq. And then I think these trends especially accelerated after Barack Obama's Dear Colleague letter that expanded the interpretation of Title IX. I'm sure you're well familiar with the fact that Title IX has been used to silence dissenting speech on campus. It has stripped many students of their due process rights. So Title IX is one place where this is occurring, but one that's even more disturbing to me lately is diversity statements, which our letter discusses. And what diversity statements are is a part of an application package for a university teacher or professor where you are expected to submit a document that expresses your dedication to diversity and inclusion, right? Now, again, there's nothing wrong with diversity or inclusion inherently, right? But as you might expect, these are very dogmatic notions of diversity and inclusion that very neatly align with a left social justice activism, right? And so we've gotten to a point where candidates to even get into the professorate are going to have to express their alignment with this ideological orientation. Now, the interesting thing is people might think, well, then just say it, right? Just write your diversity statement and then you're in, and just concede, right? But the thing is that diversity statement will then be weaponized, because at the first moment that you evidence wrongthink, then they pull your diversity statement back out and say, why are you acting this way? In your diversity statement, you said X, Y, and Z, right? That seems to be at odds with what you're doing now, right? And then that can become a factor in annual evaluations, which in turn are a factor in promotion and tenure. So really, diversity statements are one more way that the left academy has managed to screen dissenting opinions or dissident thinkers so that we can keep them out of the university and keep a homogenous ideological atmosphere.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
Towards that, it's just a lot to think about. Just at the very outset, we're stifling free thought.
And I think the sad thing is that academic job searches, especially the humanities and social sciences, are already heavily skewed towards candidates who embrace left perspectives. So, for example, in the writing of job descriptions, a job description can name check various areas of sub-expertise that for the most part are aligned with a left ideological way of thinking. And so just from the job description alone, you've already ensured that people from certain intellectual orientations will not be a good fit for the job to begin with. If they manage to slip through those screens, right, then the diversity statement provides an additional screen, right, that can sort of ferret out people who don't conform to the new norms. And then beyond that, of course, there's other hurdles also. And all of these things are from a faculty perspective or an institutional perspective. They don't touch on the ways that students are also expected to toe certain lines.
And what are some examples of that?
Well, I mean, I think it happens in very subtle ways in terms of course performance and grades. You know, I do think that sadly there are a number of professors where a student's success on various writing assignments will determine in a large way on the degree to which they agree with the professor's representation of certain realities. I do think that certain students are discouraged from pursuing research topics that might upset sort of the pieties of the academic left. And other ways are sort of just free speech zones on campus, the idea that the belief that the campus is not a place for free speech and that a space needs to be set aside where certain ideas can be spoken more or less in a corner, so that people can be insulated from the potential violence of this speech. And of course, this idea of speech as violence is an idea that is drawn from left perspectives in cultural theory, particularly the work of Judith Butler, who was also instrumental in bringing about sort of a change of opinion on topics like transgenderism or the nature of sex differences. And so these ascendant ideas, speech as violence, microaggressions, these sort of things, are things that students have to live with too. And many students, especially young ones, don't understand that these are rather new innovations in university life, right? And they don't yet have the knowledge base to understand the intellectual traditions that these ideas are coming out of. And so, like good students, right, they ascertain what the expectations of the university are, and they hew to them. They do their best to align their behavior and actions with that. Sadly, what that does is push them in a position of sort of acquiescence and acceptance, passive acceptance of ideas that really should be open for debate and discussion.
No, yeah, that's really terrible to hear. But there's hope, because I want to get to this other part in your letter. So towards the end of the letter, there are two bullet pointed sections. One section states the signatories' positions or beliefs on certain issues, and the other section outlines action steps that the signatories are willing to undertake to the best of their ability. Could you tell us about some of those positions and resolutions?
Yeah, and I should preface this by saying that the letter stipulates that not everybody who signed the letter agrees with every bullet, right? In part because we do have a diversity of perspectives among the signatories, right? But what we do all agree on is the general trend of the intellectual climate in higher education in the United States and to some extent abroad. We do have a lot of international signers. But the resolutions the resolutions are the things we resolve to do when it aligns with our individual conscience and our disciplinary expertise. And some of those things are, for example, not following mandatory reporting guidelines as far as Title IX violations. So my university says that if I witness an event that may perhaps possibly be actionable under Title IX, I am obligated to report that event to the university. Now, here's the thing, right? It doesn't say you must report something that is actionable. It says I must report anything that might be actionable. And we've moved the bar so low, right, in terms of what could constitute a Title IX threat. For example, my Title IX case was because I said in class one night that members of the LGBT community don't face discrimination in every corner of the work world. And that was enough to trigger a 9-month investigation. And my point is this, is right, like if I overhear some 19-year-old kid make a dirty joke in a hallway, right, to somebody else who doesn't seem to think that's funny, I'm just not going to report that student to the university authorities, right? I don't know how that joke was received by other people. I don't think, certainly we should be polite to one another, right? But I don't see how we can restrict people from making such jokes in public space. And frankly, given the draconian and sort of authoritarian nature of a Title IX investigation, I'm not willing to subject a 19-year-old kid to 9 months of bureaucratic misery because he made a bad joke, right? And so that's one resolution, is that we are not going to abide by mandatory reporting guidelines for Title IX. Another example would be simply safe spaces. This is very similar to the Title IX thing. We've just sort of said we're not willing to recognize that there is any specific space that should be cordoned off. And so every inch of the campus is a free speech space, and that the signers will inhabit it as such. We have also said that we will not, when we are on hiring committees, consider diversity statements as part of an application package. Now, I have to say, I'm not exactly sure what this would mean in practice, right? Because I haven't yet been on a search committee for a new professor that makes use of diversity statements. But in the event that I was, I would simply say I refuse to score this component of the application. I'm not sure what the consequences of that would be. But I think that that this is one of the reasons why the people who have signed the letter are fairly courageous, is because what the resolutions really share is that they are forms of non-compliance, moments in policy and procedural life in higher ed where the people who've signed this letter are willing to say, I am not going to do what you're asking me to do, right? And I've been doing this for a few years at my university, and I have to tell you, I had a colleague call me earlier this week and say, after the release of this letter, Adam, I just wanted to check in because you must feel really isolated, at the university. And I said, hell no, right? I feel less isolated than I've felt in years, right? Because for the first time, I recognize that there's these hundreds of other people who are engaging with similar ethical quandaries at every university across the nation, right? And that you're not alone. And that, in part, is one of the motivations that I had in inviting other signatories, was that I think for many people, this can feel very isolating to try to do what you can to resist these trends. But I think, the recognition that even, I hate that I'm going to use this phrase. Those stupid signs since COVID came around that people put on their lawn that are like, together apart, right? I'm not a big fan of those signs, but right, the letter in some ways is to remember and to document that people who are resisting these trends are not doing it alone, even though it might feel like they're doing it alone, right? And another reason that I sought signatories was because, honestly, many people have been like, oh, this was so brave for you to write this letter. And it's like, well, it wasn't an act of bravery. It was actually an act of fear, an act of uncertainty about whether or not I can do what I want to do and saying no to these things. And as soon as I clicked send on sending that letter out to, at first, 20 academics and asking them to circulate it, I knew that if people were willing to put their name to it, then I would have to commit myself to doing these things, and I wouldn't have an excuse anymore for backing down out of fear, even though that's often what I'd like to do. And so I think I hope that, to use another term from the left cultural parlance, I hope that it's empowering for signatories. And I hope also that it's empowering for graduate students and untenured faculty and even undergraduates who feel oftentimes like they are, for lack of a better term, marginalized, right, in certain discussions and components of daily life in higher education.
No, that's so positive, and I think it will comfort and inspire people across the country and also in other countries also. Well, you kind of touched on this, because my next question was going to be about professional consequences. There may be professional consequences to doing any of the outlined resolutions. So have you received any criticism or pushback, or have any of the other signatories since the publication of the letter?
There's a few that I would, yes. The answer to your question is yes, but I feel like I'm not prepared to talk about the specifics of those instances just yet, because I want to see how they shake out, and I don't want to intensify the situation anymore by talking about those things. But yeah, I mean, I think for me that was the sort of moment of the decision, was I had to decide, am I willing to face real consequences for this? And I think in some way, it was my kids I have young children. And in some ways it was my kids who made me think, yeah, I'm willing to face consequences for this. And part of where that comes from is I was the first person in my family to go to college. And my parents were great, great encouragers of my curiosity and my love of learning when I was a kid. And when I got to university, I found this place that like you could really explore, and that the boundaries seemed to be limitless for thought. And that at least at some stage, there were people willing to help you develop as a thinker, wherever that path took you, right? And I felt like many of my teachers weren't aiming to make me into them. They were aiming to make me into the best thinker that I could be. And so when I managed to secure a position in the university, I was so grateful for having a space and a place in society where I could spend my life doing something that I really love doing, thinking and reading and teaching and writing. And the thought that my kids in 15 years might not have a university to inherit that can provide the same thing for them as it did for me, was enough to make me think, well, and this isn't big. Like, one thing that everybody should understand is, we're not going to break the machine here, right? This is 170 people, right? And when higher ed wants to, swipe me off of their arm, that's what'll happen, right? It won't be hard to do. But I can't say when that happens that it was for lack of trying. And I think that maybe that's the point that we're at, is I think people who are dissident thinkers spend a few years saying to our colleagues, look, this is really dangerous. And I think kind of now we're past the point. I think that many of us have the feeling that our attempt to appeal to our colleagues to mobilize against these trends, at least I feel like that those attempts have failed. And so in the absence of mobilization among faculty at a larger level, then really all that's left to resist these things is to say, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. And so in a sense, this is a movement into a new phase, at least for me, and I think for some of the other signers, in saying that, look, we tried to address these problems in other ways through dialogue, through policymaking and other avenues, and we were largely unsuccessful. But I'm not willing to watch the university as we know it slip away without attempting something. And so at least, I don't know, at least there was an attempt to preserve what we had, even if ultimately we are not yet even at the end point of the reinvention of the university.
I think that's a very courageous and admirable stance to take. And I think our readers and viewers will also agree with that. Okay, so Adam, those are all my questions. Thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks very much for having me. It was a pleasure.